If you're old enough to remember the old Dragnet show on radio and television, you'll probably recall Jack Webb's ritual reminder that only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. In this program, some of the more crucial names have not been changed, they've been deleted. And the deletions were made not by the producers of the program, but by the Justice Department of the United States government. And it's not the innocent who are being protected, it's the guilty.
2. Director, FBI. From Special Agent in Charge, Phoenix.
FBI memo released by the Justice Department. Name of Special Agent deleted by Justice Department.
Subject, Counterintelligence Program, Internal Security, Disruption of the New Left. Date, May 31st, 1968. On the basis of developments to date, it is apparent that New Left organizations and activities in the Phoenix metropolitan area have received their inspiration and leadership almost exclusively from the members of the faculty in the Department of Philosophy at Arizona State University, ASU, chiefly Assistant Professor Morris J. Starsky. The most logical targets for potential counterintelligence action locally are therefore pretty obvious.
You got these documents from the FBI by suit under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, could you tell me why you suspected in the first place that there was material on you in the FBI files?
Well, the suspicion wasn't based on too much because I really...
Morris Starsky, anti-war activist, member of Socialist Workers' Party, former assistant professor of philosophy at Arizona State University.
Although there was a period of time in Phoenix when I noticed that a car was parked in front of our house for great lengths of time, the same car, the same man sitting there. So I suspected that being some kind of surveillance. There was always the ubiquitous long-range telephoto cameras in operation at every demonstration and every opportunity there could be. The amount of press coverage that the anti-war movement got in Arizona, and especially that I got as one of the leaders of the anti-war movement in Arizona since 1965, created a kind of atmosphere that led me to believe they've got to be keeping records. I didn't have any idea at all, zero idea at all, that there were COINTELPRO documents.
COINTELPRO, the FBI's acronym for its counterintelligence program, brainchild of J. Edgar Hoover, targeted mainly against blacks, anti-war activists, and what was known in the 60s as the New Left. It was only last November that the Justice Department officially acknowledged that there had been such a program, but evidence pointing to the existence of COINTELPRO first began surfacing about 4 years ago. In the early hours of the morning of March 8, 1971, almost 1,000 documents were stolen from the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. 2 weeks later, leading U.S. newspapers and key congressmen began receiving copies of the FBI papers mailed by an underground group calling itself the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. Attorney General John Mitchell pleaded with the press not to publish the documents, the nation's top law enforcement official, claiming that publication could endanger the lives of FBI agents and constitute a threat to national security. Ignoring his pleas, the Washington Post began publishing the papers, deleting most names and locations. In a sense, Mitchell's concern about national security was justified, because the feeling generated by the FBI documents among many segments of the nation was a deep-seated insecurity. A memo dated November 4, 1970, showed J. Edgar Hoover ordering investigations of all groups organized to project the demands of black students. A newsletter from the Bureau's Philadelphia office instructed agents to increase interviews with dissenters. This, the letter said, will enhance the paranoia endemic in these circles and will further serve to get the point across that there is an FBI agent behind every mailbox. Another document referred to the sending of anonymous radical material to college educators who, quote, have shown reluctance to take decisive action against the New Left. In the space of less than 2 months, the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI sent almost 800 documents to various papers around the country. With its final consignment of papers, the Commission included an analysis of all the documents taken from the Bureau's media office. The study showed that 40% of the material dealt with political surveillance, only 1% with organized crime. Of that 40% devoted to political espionage, the report said 2 documents concerned right-wing groups, while more than 200 dealt with left or liberal groups. We now know, of course, that at that time it was not only the FBI that was interested in watching and disrupting liberal and left-wing politics. We know that in 1970, then-President Nixon approved a COINTELPRO type operation, authored by White House aide Thomas Charles Houston. The Houston Plan calling for the formation of an intelligence evaluation committee outside the Justice Department to collect information on anti-war and radical groups, the data to be collected by means such as illegal wiretaps and burglaries. Indications are the plan never got off the ground, J. Edgar Hoover refusing to participate on the grounds that existing coverage was adequate. We didn't find out how adequate Hoover's vendetta against the left was until December of 1973, when more secret FBI documents came to light. This time they were released by the Justice Department, but only under the compulsion of a court order sought by NBC reporter Carl Stern under the Freedom of Information Act. These new documents showed that Hoover formally began his campaign against the left in May of 1968. In an internal memorandum written that month, Hoover orders the Bureau to expose, disrupt, and otherwise neutralize the new left. The memo goes on to instruct all Bureau offices to take advantage, quote, of all opportunities for counterintelligence and also inspire action where circumstances may warrant. That directive appears to have remained FBI policy for the next 3 years, until April 28, 1971, when an order came down to kill the program immediately. One doesn't have to look very far afield to figure out why. Only 1 month earlier, the Washington Post had begun publishing the documents stolen from the FBI's office in Media, Pennsylvania. In 1972, J. Edgar Hoover died, and that same year the Justice Department initiated an in-house probe of the FBI in an effort to purge the Bureau of the Orgian ordure left by Hoover's 48-year reign. First results, released November 18, 1974, indicated that COINTELPRO had begun not in 1968, as Carl Stern's memo suggested, but a full 12 years earlier, in 1956. Listeners to the KPFK Evening News got the story from Pacifica's Paz Cohen.
According to the release, there were 2,370 approved operations under the 7 separate COINTELPRO programs from 1956 to 1971, with over 500 instances of known results. 5 of the 7 programs were aimed at domestic groups, 2 at foreign and foreign-connected groups. The program's goals extended from exposure to neutralization. The activities revealed range from floating stories from public source material to friendly media with the goal of exposing the aims and activities of the various groups, to attempted discrediting of candidates for political office, to attempts to, quote, use religious and civil leaders and organizations to exert pressure on state and local governments, employers, and landlords to the detriment of the various groups. The programs, begun in 1956, were aimed at alleged subversive or disruptive groups, organizations, and individuals. The only target from 1956 to 71 was the Communist Party USA, followed by the Socialist Workers' Party, and later so-called white hate groups, so-called black extremists, and the so-called New Left. No information was released on the foreign-aimed COINTELPRO activities for national security reasons. In releasing the data, Attorney General Saxby noted that in a small number of instances, some of these programs involved what we consider today to be improper activities. Project COINTELPRO was officially ended in 1971, and Saxby said steps have been taken to prevent a recurrence of the improper activities. The Justice Department document notes that some activities also form part of the FBI's ongoing responsibilities and are listed as COINTELPRO only because they were reported as such. Before detailing any of the activities, the Justice Department release calls some unspecified actions taken under COINTELPRO's name abhorrent in a free society, adding that these activities were neither the purpose nor the major characteristic of COINTELPRO. among the COINTELPRO activities. Sending anonymous or fictitious materials to members or groups, quote, to create dissension and cause disruption. This reportedly accounted for 40% of COINTELPRO activities. Another 20% of COINTELPRO's work, reportedly, consisted of disseminating public record information to media sources to expose various groups. This was done mostly with regard to the Communist Party USA. Following the spreading of public information, the program also leaked investigative and informant material, particularly about black and racist white groups. Informants reportedly accounted for less than 2% of COINTELPRO activities, but informants are classified as other than agents provocateurs. Notifications of individuals' so-called illegal, immoral, radical, and Communist Party activities were sent to employers, prospective employers, credit bureaus, and creditors, quote, to affect adversely their credit standing or employment status. This tactic was used mostly against blacks and the New Left. Attempts to persuade religious and civic leaders to seek action against groups was targeted predominantly against so-called black extremists. And anonymous communications were sent to parents and family members, quote, advising them of immoral or radical activities on the part of various individuals. Of the 30 times this tactic was admittedly employed, 16 instances were directed at the New Left. Of the 12 reported and admittedly troubling instances of activities related to political or judicial processes, most consisted of leaking information to discredit unnamed political candidates, including one mayoral contender. Attorney General Saxby refused to identify any groups or individuals by name. This is Paz Cohen, Pacifica Radio in Washington.
But since that time, the Justice Department has identified one COINTELPRO target by name, Morris J. Starsky. We have already seen that in 1968, the FBI was concerned about Starsky's organizing activities in Phoenix. In this next FBI memo, dated July 1, 1968, we see the first of the Bureau's attempts to get Starsky fired.
2. Director, FBI. From Special Agent in Charge, Phoenix. Subject, Counterintelligence Program, Internal Security, Disruption of the New Left. The status of captioned program in the Phoenix Division as of July 1, 1968 may be summarized as follows. 1. Potential counterintelligence action. It was mentioned in Phoenix letter of May 31, 1968, that Morris J. Starsky, as a public employee, is understood to be of interest and concern to... There are now indications that as a result of this interest, which is by no means a matter of public record and is unlikely to become such, the Board of Regents, which exercises administrative control of the state universities, may soon find cause to separate Professor Starsky from the public payroll. It is considered that he may have falsified attendance records or something of that nature. Starsky's dismissal from the ASU faculty could be expected to disrupt New Left organizations at Arizona State University and in the Phoenix area generally.
It didn't work. Starsky remained on the ASU faculty and continued his organizing work, keeping the left in the Phoenix area very much alive. But in January 1970, he unwittingly gave his enemies just the ammunition they needed to get him fired. With the full knowledge of the chairman of his department, he canceled a class to attend a protest rally.
Some right-wing legislator, probably, who knows, probably inspired by the FBI, who's aware of these ways of getting people, raised the question, well, was he in class? Did he have a class that day? See? Well, then it was obvious. I mean, sure I had a class that day, but I didn't attend. So the cry went up in the legislature, and again, we don't know who inspired that cry. I wouldn't put it past the FBI to have inspired. I mean, some of these legislators at that time were real ultra-rightists, so that it could have been independent. But you never know, especially nowadays. They put the pressure on the regents. The regents began making sounds of like summary dismissal. The university attempted to block the summary dismissal move by formally reprimanding me for cutting a class by written letter of reprimand from the dean. First time it's ever happened in the history of the university, a written letter of reprimand for missing a class. And supporters of mine decided to counter the regents thing by having a nationwide telegram campaign directed against the regents to stop the summary thing and to move in the direction of due process. because the Regents had agreed to follow the AAUP procedures for tenured faculty members, and so this was a reasonable demand. You agreed to these procedures, follow them. They were forced to follow those procedures. An ad hoc committee was established to investigate me, so like a grand jury. That's a secret committee appointed by the president.
The resourceful FBI agent in Phoenix saw the faculty committee as a golden opportunity for some disruptive activity. So on April 7, 1970, he wired the following suggestion to Washington.
2. Director, FBI. From Special Agent in Charge, Phoenix. Subject: COINTELPRO, New Left. Enclosed herewith for the consideration of the Bureau are 6 copies of an anonymous letter being suggested for mailing to 5 faculty members at Arizona State University, ASU, hearing charges against Professor Morris J. Starsky, in the Phoenix Division. Starsky is the subject of a hearing which resumed on April 6, 1970, before the Faculty Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure at ASU. This committee is weighing several charges made against Starsky, and recurring news reports have stressed that the Arizona State Legislature and the Arizona Board of Regents both are anxious that Starsky not be retained on the faculty at ASU. There has been some faculty and student support developed for Starsky on the ASU campus. He is the faculty advisor for the Young Socialist Alliance and the Student Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, SMC. And local sources believe that he is the catalyst of meaningful New Left protests on the ASU campus and in the greater Phoenix area. Bureau approval is requested to mail a copy of the enclosed anonymous letter to each member of the faculty committee which is hearing the charges against Starsky. This committee is sitting in the law school on the ASU campus and is composed of the following faculty members. 1. Dr. Ross R. Rice, Chairman. 2. John A. Cochran. 3. Richard W. Efland. 4. John P. Decker. 5. Wallace Adams, Chairman of the Faculty Assembly.
On April 24th, Washington gave its assent, and on May 12, 1970, Special Agent in Charge Phoenix reported that the letters had been mailed.
Dear Sir, it seems appropriate that you should be informed of one of the most recent activities of Morris J. Starsky. Starsky learned of a suicide attempt by one of his close campus co-workers, David Murphy. Feeling that Murphy could no longer be trusted as a member of the campus socialist group, Starsky demanded that Murphy return all literature and other materials belonging to the socialist group. Murphy refused to give Starsky a quantity of socialist literature in his possession until Starsky would pay him a sum slightly in excess of $50, which was owed for telephone calls charged by Starsky to Murphy's telephone. Morris Starsky was indignant at Murphy's independent attitude, and at 2 a.m. on April 5, 1970, he, accompanied by his wife Pamela and 2 young male associates, invaded Murphy's apartment and, under threat, demanded return of the socialist literature. When Murphy refused unless Starsky paid the phone bill, Starsky told him that his 2 associates would beat him unmercifully. Murphy, convalescing from a recent hospital stay, was under great fear of bodily harm or death and surrendered the literature. I find this episode interesting. Where did Starsky learn of the effectiveness of smashing into a person's home at 2 a.m.? Also, of utilizing 4 persons to threaten the health or life of someone? Is this an example of academic socialism? Should the ASU student body enjoy the guidance of such an instructor? It seems to me that this type of activity is something that Himmler or Beria could accept with pride. If Starsky did not enjoy the prestige and sanctuary of his position, he would be properly punished for such a totalitarian venture. Unfortunately, Murphy is too terrified to testify against Starsky. This is another example of Starsky's brand of academic socialism. A concerned ASU alumnus.
What about the substance behind this anonymous letter? Is there any substance behind it?
No, none whatsoever. It's pretty upsetting that the FBI would use a situation in which we were all very deeply concerned about David Murphy. He was just suffering a great deal of personal, emotional crisis and a lot of problems, and he was confused about a lot of things. No one threatened him. No one was, harsh with him in any way. We were all very concerned that he, get back together again. He was going through hell, literally. I mean, he was really hurting. See, so then of course, we found out that he'd filed a complaint the next day. We found out both that he'd filed it and withdrawn it the next day. But nobody did anything. This what the FBI did, moved in on this situation, moved in and exploited a troubled human being. Then they tried to ruin me with this anonymous letter to the committee. And then thirdly, they simply totally, the shameful disregard of this committee's role, this committee's responsibility. Here's a body charged by the regents under, I'm sure, quasi-legal, framework, to act as a kind of trial board or jury or whatever. And here's this attempt to subvert it by the FBI. I mean, if that had been gone, my lawyer says if that had happened in a court to a jury, it would be criminal. It'd be criminally prosecutable for that. It's a criminal offense to tamper that way, and that's what they did. And total disregard for the serious responsibility that these people have. So what you've got is a bunch of people in this government agency who have absolutely no regard for any kind of values whatsoever. None, zero. I mean, no regard for any kind of human values whatsoever. Just out to do what they can to keep people from holding, expressing, or fighting for certain kinds of ideas that they don't approve of, that they consider to be subversive.
Actually, the letter didn't work, did it?
The letter did not work. That's the beauty of this. That's what, in praise of the committee, they just didn't buy that at all and did their job properly. We don't know whether they sent copies to the regents. See, that we don't know from any of these inter-office memos. We don't know what the regents' connection with the FBI is yet. We may find out later on. But at the level of the committee stuck to the evidence, stuck to the testimony, and said no reason to fire him.
But in spite of the committee's findings, the regents and the FBI did eventually have their way. The regents ordered the president of Arizona State University not to renew Starsky's contract. Strange, though, trouble seemed to follow Starsky wherever he went.
After I left Arizona, I got a one-year visiting lectureship at San Diego State. The understanding there was that it was a one-year deal, but if money became available, I would be retained because that department thought well of my work. In November of that year, a vicious red-baiting editorial hit in the San Diego Union, alerting the public to the revolutionary Red Menace in its midst and suggesting the Arizona treatment. The university, again, we're not sure, I mean, the FBI must have been involved in that. We don't know, have any evidence. The university freaked and chopped the philosophy department's money off for the following year. So that following year, I accepted a position. This was fall of '71. They solicited me, Cal State Dominguez Hills. They were looking for a chair, rode around the country, and all kinds of people recommended me. That certainly established a certain level of qualification. So they called me. I came up to LA, was interviewed, and about a month later I got an offer, accepted it, moved to LA, got a key to the department, started organizing things, and 9 days before classes began, they notified me they were canceling the contract because I had exhibited less than candor or something, didn't tell them about being fired at Arizona State University. Well, technically I wasn't really fired. I mean, legally, technically, honestly, I wasn't really fired. I was not renewed. The president refused to fire me, and the regents waited until the expiration of the contract date. So I wasn't really fired.
Starsky fought the Dominguez Hills firing in the court and won his case. He is also continuing his fight to win reinstatement at Arizona State. So far, he has won the first round, but the Arizona Regents have taken the case to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In the meantime, Starsky, a Ph.D. in philosophy, works as a freelance legal researcher. But this is not a man who is easily cowed. On the contrary, he is ebullient, enthusiastic. filled with the energy of a man who believes that the fight is worth it and victory will be his. On the other hand, he harbors no illusion that America in 1975 is a promised land for Morris Starsky or anyone else on the left. And he suspects that recent terrorist attacks on socialist groups in Los Angeles have taken their cue from the FBI and the CIA.
I do want to make the connection as strong as I possibly can between the kinds of activities that we're now finding out that the government's been engaged in, that the CIA, the FBI have been engaged in, and the overt government rationales, like Helm's rationale for the CIA spying on Americans and opening mail. We wanted to see if Americans were involved in, American dissidents were involved in foreign subversion mechanisms. See, that kind of rationale and that kind of activities, I don't think a connection can be made strong enough between that and CS attacks on the Rosenbergs, the committee to open the Rosenberg, and the bookstore bombing of the October League bookstore, which was bombed, and the SWP East Branch headquarters, which was bombed. That climate of opinion that's set by government policy, government rationalizations, and government agency action does that, sets that up. Even if it turns out that a government agency wasn't directly involved, that they didn't plan it out and provide the bombs and the CS gas. And that's why that connection has to be made very strongly between stopping the FBI and the CIA from doing this, if we want to stop the mad bombers, whether they be right-wing organizations, cop squads, red squads, or just lone nuts who've heard the signal, it's open season on dissidents because the CIA and the FBI and the government says so, and go out and make a bomb and blow up a building and kill a bunch of people. These kind of attacks aren't just attacks on socialists. They're attacks on Jews. Implicitly, they're attacks on Jews. That's what when they took credit, when this Nazi Liberation Front took credit for the bombing, they said what they meant by, when they said they were going to exterminate socialists, they said they meant Jews and blacks, using their degrading term, and communists. So it really is important that everybody on the left, and especially people who would be listening to KPFK and who support KPFK as a voice of diverse views in the spectrum of people fighting for alternative society or social movements of a progressive nature, that those people support the democratic rights of October League to exist and to live and to circulate its ideas, the SWP to exist and to circulate its ideas, in that they're defending themselves. There's an old lesson that was learned long ago by people on the left, that unless you're willing to defend everybody's rights, you're not going to be able to defend your own.
You've been listening to COINTELPRO, One Man's Story. The program was produced for Pacifica Radio by Dave Boxall, with assistance from Tim McGovern, Mike Hodell, Barbara Spark, Morris J. Starsky, and the Freedom of Information Act.